So once again, good morning, everyone, and welcome to our Sunday morning service for January the 9th, 2022. And we'll begin with the silent meditation, followed by the recitation of the name of the Buddha or the Nembutsu. Please join me in Gassho. Naman Nobs, Naman Nobs, Naman Nobs, Naman Nobs, Naman Nobs. Okay, next we're going to read together the Shim Buddhist pledge, and I brought it up on the screen for those of you who may not have printed it out. So we'll read this Shim Buddhist pledge together. The Shim Buddhist pledge. I take refuge in the vow of the Buddha, uttering the sacred name. I will live my life with strength and serenity. I receive the light of the Buddha. I will put effort into my work with self-reflection and gratitude. I follow the teaching of the Dharma. Discerning the right path, I will spread the true Dharma. I rejoice in the compassion of the Buddha. I will respect and help others and do my best for the welfare of mankind. Namandaps, namandaps, namandaps. Next, we're actually going to chant the English version of the Shoshinye. For those of you that have the red Satan, it is on page 106. Fred says, I think you might have it. It's on page 106. So with the English chanting, it's one beat per syllable. And then where there is a hyphenation, it's, well, actually not in this one, but you'll notice that it will go down in intonation at certain points. So you could just follow along as we do the chanting. Namandaps, namandaps, namandaps. Trust in the working of limitless life. Bow to the light that surpasses all thought. Bodhisattva Dharmakara in his seeking stage. Satlokeshvara Raja at his Buddha seat. He learned the causes and conditions of each Buddha land. Studied the inhabitants and all their qualities. On this foundation, he brought forth supreme aspiration, awakening the great vow all embracing, vast and rare, through ages of reflection, determining his vow. He reaffirmed his calling name would be heard everywhere. Thus he radiates his light, immeasurable and boundless, unhindered beyond compare, a dazzling, glorious blaze, light that purifies the mind, light of joy and wisdom, light unceasing beyond thought, far beyond description, brighter than the sun and moon, illuminating countless worlds. Every being, everyone receives this radiant light. The calling name of the primal vow properly directs us. The vow of sincere and trusting mind becomes for us the cause. Equal awakening is attained, confirming great nirvana. Because of the vow's fulfillment, nirvana is surely attained. The reason that Tathagata came forth into our world was to teach Amida's primal vow, boundless as the ocean. Now beings also boundless in this evil impure age should respond in trust and take to heart Tathagata's true words. If for the briefest moment the mind of joy awakes, we realize nirvana, though our minds remain defiled. Worldly wise dharma haters all will turn and enter, as rivers pour into the sea, becoming of one taste. The all-embracing mind light always shines on and protects us. The darkness of our ignorance already has dispersed. Yet craving, anger, greed, and hatred, like dark clouds and mist, always cover up the sky of true insight and faith. As clouds and mist obscure the sun, covering its light, yet beneath them pure light radiates, no darkness can be found. Receiving faith with reverence, discernment, and great joy, Without delay we leap across beyond the evil realms. When ordinary beings, whether full of good or evil, hear and trust Tathagata's all-embracing vow, Shakyamuni calls them all superior, clear-sighted. Such people are correctly named white lotus flowers. Amida Buddha's primal vow established Nembutsu. Yet we who cling to evil views with arrogance and pride can never easily receive the truth with joyful faith. There is nothing that could be more difficult than this. The masters of the teachings from India in the West, and all the noble monks who lived in China and Japan, explain to us the great sage came with a true intention to clarify the primal vow accords with everyone. Shakyamuni Buddha dwelling on Mount Lanka, to the multitudes foretold one day in India's south, Mahasattva Nagarjuna will appear in this world and destroy dualistic views of being and non-being, transmitting Mahayana, the Dharma unsurpassed. He will realize the stage of joy, be born in the land of peace, and teach that arduous practice is like struggling down an endless road, while joyful trust in the easy way is a peaceful voyage at sea. With mindful recollection of Amida's primal vow, without design instantly we reach a certain stage, and with the soul eternal praising of Tathagata's name, let us repay the kindness of the great compassionate vow. Bodhisattva Vasubandhu in his discourse stated that he has surrendered to unhindered light, relying on the larger sutra. He revealed true virtue, made known that with the great vow we leap over birth and death. Through the power of the primal vow, transferring us its virtue, he revealed the single mind, delivering all beings, entering the all-pervading precious sea of merit, we surely will be numbered with the great assembly, allowed to reach the lotus world. We realize true suchness, true Dharma nature is attained clearly without doubt. We play in the forest of passions, yet manifest wonderful powers. We enter birth and death's garden, transformed to benefit all. The king of Liang in ancient China, revered Master Tanwan, and daily bow toward his teacher, a bodhisattva in his eyes. When Master Bodhi gave Tanwan a Pure Land text, he burned his Taoist books and placed his trust in the land of peace. He wrote a commentary on Vasubandhu's discourse, revealed cause and effect of birth, both come from the vow. We depart and we return because of other power. Only through the mind of faith is Buddhahood assured. When the mind of faith awakes in ordinary beings, we are made aware that birth and death is nothing but nirvana. And when unfailingly we reach the limitless and radiant land, we will save the myriad of beings everywhere. Tao Cho discerned on the noble path, attainment is hard to confirm, and clarified the Pure Land as the sole way to break through. Criticize self-power, practice of the myriad good works, and urged us only to recite the perfectly virtuous name. He kindly taught us face aspects, pure mind, single and constant, guides us as a Dharma declines toward outward form and extinction, meeting the all-embracing vow, though doing evil all our lives. We reach the world of nurturing peace, realize the fruit of enlightenment. Shantao alone shone light upon the Buddha's true intent, empathizing with those who practice good and with the rebellious and evil. He made it clear that the radiant name is the cause and condition for birth, clearing the way for all to enter the great sea of wisdom, the primal vow. We then receive the diamond mind, one and indestructible, through one moment of joyful thought in oneness with Amida. With Vaidehi we acquire faith and joy and wisdom, awaken to the way things are, eternal and at peace. Genshin studied fully every teaching of the Buddha, chose refuge in the peaceful realm, imploring all to follow. Divided deep and single faith from shallow sundry practice. Distinguished birth in the true pure land from provisional attainments. He taught that even evil ones should simply say the Buddha's name. I too, he said, am fully in Tathagata's embrace. Though my defiled and anxious mind prevents me from perceiving it, the light of great compassion shines upon me ceaselessly. Our own master Honen understood the Buddha's teachings with compassion for all ordinary beings, good or bad. He caused the true essential way to flourish in these islands, proclaimed the selected primal vow throughout the evil world. Returning to samsara's house, the wheel of birth and death, results when doubt and lack of trust become the mind's foundation. But when the mind of faith awakes, we are quickly made to enter the home of pure tranquility, transcending all conditions. The Mahasattvas and masters, through teaching the sutras, have saved all countless beings so defiled and corrupt. Now in our own time, both lay people and monks, let us trust with one heart what our noble masters have taught. The virtue of Amida's vow is shared equally by all, together attaining awakened mind. We are born in the land of peace. Namanobs, namanobs, namanobs. Namanobs. Change that. And so once again, good morning, everyone. And can you all still hear me okay? Yes? Okay, good. Welcome again to our service. And today I want to talk a little bit about changing perspectives. And I'm going to, first of all, read a passage from Shinan's Wasan. So if I can ask you, please put your hands together in Gassho. If we do not receive the power of the universal vow, when can we leave this Saha world? Contemplating deeply on the Buddha's compassion, we should always utter Amida's name. Namo Amida Butsu, Namo Amida Butsu. So as I mentioned, today I wanted to talk to you a little bit about changing perspectives. As some of you know or have heard, that my Uncle Mac had been in the hospital, and in fact he was in there for about 2 weeks, and he just was returned back to Maples. But what was interesting was that prior to him going into the hospital, one of his pastimes, I'll call it a pastimes because I think it's quite common amongst seniors living in facilities such as Maples or even here at Wisteria's, is that for the lack of anything better to do, perhaps, they always complain about the food. And my uncle used to always complain about the food at Maples, how in particular in the last several years, he said the quality of the food has declined quite rapidly. And having helped him, taking him down to the dining room for his meals, I sort of understood what he was talking about when he was complaining about the food. However, upon entering the hospital, my uncle started to change his perspective because the hospital food was even worse than Maples. And having been in there for 2 weeks, he now was able to appreciate with a new light the food at Maples. And as I was thinking about this, it reminded me actually of an incident that happened to me. Oh, this is a number of years ago when I was still a minister in Toronto. I was invited to go to a youth correctional institution called the Blue Water Center in Godridge, Ontario. Godridge is trying to recall myself, but I think it was almost like 2-hour drive out of Toronto. The reason why I was invited was, so as part of the Correctional Institute, they try to provide activities for the youth. And one of the activities was religious studies, believe it or not. And they, some of the youths expressed an interest to have a Buddhist, a minister, come and talk to them about Buddhism. So I went there, and it was, you know, I had to do a police security check. And then when you get there, they're very, very careful of what you're taking in with you. And it was a full lockdown of like a prison, basically. And as I got in there, I noticed that the youth I was talking with, there was a group of them, must have been about 8 or 9 altogether. They all seemed quite normal. However, in talking with them, I began to realize that many of them were in there because of addictions. They had started out an addiction of some form or another, which led them to the life of crime in order to feed their addictions. And that caused them to be incarcerated. And so as we talked, you know, the youth seemed interested in Buddhism, but I found out that there was an ulterior motive for them having me go there. And that was that by having me as a guest, the youths that were involved in this program, they were allowed to have a special meal together with me. So it wasn't the institution meal, but they actually ordered local Chinese food from Godridge, Ontario. And let me tell you, maybe some of you have gone to some small, well, being here in Richmond, we're spoiled. We're very spoiled because we have a whole selection of Chinese food. You know, wherever we go, there's Chinese food and very good Chinese food. But in Godridge, Ontario, I think there was only one, maybe Western Chinese food in the whole village of Godridge. And so they had ordered takeout from there. And of course, for myself, I looked at it and I thought, oh, it's typical of very Western Chinese food. The selections that they had. And I didn't, personally, I wasn't too keen on it, but to the boys, it was such a special treat. They ate it up like it was the best Chinese food that you could have in this world. And it made me realize the different perspectives. You know, here I was coming from a very different place, and I was almost not looking down, but not appreciating the meal as I should have been. And so as I began thinking about this different perspectives, yesterday I had an interesting experience. Well, actually, we had Dharma school yesterday. We call it Kids Sangha, and we've been doing it on Saturdays now. And yesterday was our first session for 2022. And Shelley John, who is our Dharma school teacher, she suggested, can we go back to sort of the very basics and start off again the new year talking about what we call the Four Noble Truths. It's one of the most basic and fundamental teachings of the historical Buddha, Shakyamuni. And it starts off with the truth of suffering. And so usually when we talk about the truth of suffering, we talk about four great sufferings in life: birth, sickness, old age, and death. And a lot of times when we talk about this, we often don't really emphasize it with the children that much because we think, well, they're so far removed from death that they may not be able to understand it as well. But yesterday, during my session, I asked them, I was curious to see what their perception was. And as I was noticing, we had about 8 Dharma school kids all on Zoom. And they had all encountered death in one way or another. A couple of them, several of them, actually lost their grandparents within the last couple of years. And there were, of course, other kids who lost pets in their lives as well. So I began to see that, in fact, that although in the past we would talk about these Four Noble Truths and perhaps not emphasize death as much with kids, but I realized that death is, in fact, very much a part of their existence as well. And when I began thinking about this, normally when we talk about the Four Noble Truths, so the first is the truth of suffering. And then the second, of course, is the causation of suffering, examining why we suffer. And then we say the third is the cessation of suffering, the truth of cessation of suffering, that there is a stage that goes beyond the suffering. And finally, the fourth of the Four Noble Truths, the truth of the path to the cessation of the suffering, or what we call the Eightfold Noble Path. And this is the pathway as a Buddhist that we can get out of this world of suffering. But as I was thinking about it with the kids, I came up with a new understanding of the Four Noble Truths. And I began to realize, when we talk about the Four Noble Truths, we often talk about it on a first-person perspective, that in our lives, we're going to experience sickness, old age, death. Of course, all of us experience birth as well. But what I began to realize that this truth is just as important to know, not for my own suffering, but the suffering of others. If we understand, if we experience the illness or the old age or the passing of loved ones, then we begin to realize the truth of empathy and compassion. And this is, in fact, a very important aspect of the Buddhist teaching. The understanding through experiencing suffering of others, there is something that we can do to help out. In fact, it might be more important than the suffering of ourselves, because when we are experiencing those sufferings, such as illness, old age, or death, there's not really much we can do about it, about ourselves. We go through that process, that experience. But when we see others who are suffering, there is something we can do. We can be there with them. We can share our compassion with them. And I ask the children, what can you do to help when you do find somebody that is sick or that is not well? And they thought about it for a while, and some of them said, we could bring them food, we could help feed them. One other said, we could hold their hand. All these things are expressions of compassion. And perhaps when we think about the Four Noble Truths, to overcome the suffering is not just the overcoming the suffering for myself, but it is to help others in their suffering. And as I read in the first, my introductory passage, if we do not receive the power of the universal vow, when can we leave the Saha world? Contemplating deeply on the Buddha's compassion, we should always utter Amida's name. If we do not receive the power of the universal vow is the vow that says that we are determined to save all beings who are in suffering. So if we cannot help others, then how can we leave this world of suffering? So through that, we receive the compassion of the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. And we recite the name of the Buddha in gratitude. So I hope, again, different perspectives. When we hear something one way, we think of it in one perspective. But sometimes through experience, we can encounter a different way of understanding. And when we do so, we get a broader experience, a broader understanding of the true meaning of the Dharma. So I thank you all for joining us, and we'll close today's session with a recitation of the Nembutsu. Please join me in Gassho. Namo Amida Butsu, Namo Amida Butsu, Namo. Thank you very much, everyone. I hope the audio was okay for you, and you can mute yourself if you wish to do so now.
Thank you, Sensei.
Thank you, Sensei.
Thank you very much,
Thank you,
Grant.
Sensei.
Thank
And the audio was
Sensei.
excellent.
Thank you,
Thank
Sensei.
everybody.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you.
everybody. Thank you, Sensei.
Bye.
Thank you.
Sensei.
Oh, Maya, if you could just stay on for just a
Sensei.
second.